Who pays for it? I mean, where's the justice? Who is responsible?
New at 6, stunned reaction from the family of a man who died under the watch of prison guards. Inmate Mathew Walker died at the Charlotte Correctional Institution last year. Today we learned a grand jury decided there was not enough evidence to indict any of the guards involved. Today, NBC2 anchor Joe Roth spoke with Walker's family.
Peter, even though the medical examiner said Mathew Walker died of asphyxiation and blunt force trauma, and inmates said they heard him being beaten to death, a grand jury said there wasn't enough evidence to tell who was responsible.
But I can just see him screaming for help and me not being there to help him.
Dead just 2 months before he was supposed to be a free man. Mathew Walker's sister says there isn't a day that goes by where he's not on her mind.
Had I been checking on him more often, maybe this wouldn't have happened.
May Atkins has been seeking justice for more than a year since Walker died at the Charlotte Correctional Institution. Sources tell NBC2 he was beaten to death.
He was murdered. He was choked to death. Who do I talk to?
But a scathing decision handed down by a grand jury states there's not enough evidence to indict any of the 9 officers involved. 19 witnesses and 8 days of looking at evidence, and the grand jury says it's still unclear who was responsible.
So it had to be somebody. Might not have been a whole 9, but 1 out of 9. You know that. We know that.
The grand jury also blasted the Department of Corrections, saying staff at the correction facility didn't handle evidence properly, from walkie-talkies believed to be used in the beating to preserving the crime scene until investigators arrived the next day. They call Walker's death tragic, senseless, and avoidable. Atkins just wants to know who's to blame.
Whoever did it, I pray to God that he saved their souls.
Atkins says this entire process has been frustrating. A majority of her information comes from us when we tell her. The grand jury did offer half a dozen recommendations, from working surveillance cameras to medical kits, to prevent this from happening there again. Live in the control room, Joe Roth, NBC2.
Hacking around. Walker case may live again. In 2013, at a New York State prison, 5 corrections officers attacked 56-year-old Kevin Moore. They beat him. They kicked him. They struck him with their batons. When they were finished, Moore was lying in a pool of blood with 5 fractured ribs, a collapsed lung, and several broken bones in his face. A clump of his dreadlocks was jerked from his head as a trophy, all according to a New York Times story. Moore was not given medical attention, but was put in solitary confinement. The guards then cleaned up the blood and falsified records to cover up their brutality. Sound familiar? In the New York case, Moore lived. But Mathew Walker, an inmate who was beaten to death at Charlotte County Correctional Institution in 2014, didn't. Moore's case was different in one other way. Federal prosecutors were able to coerce at least one of the 5 guards involved in the beating to talk. That confession allowed them to prosecute each of the corrections officers who took part in Moore's beating and the cover-up of evidence. That didn't happen in Charlotte County. As we have documented in stories and editorials, none of the 10 guards involved in the Mathew Walker episode were charged with any crime. Prosecutors said their stories did not always ring consistent, but no one reported seeing anything that would constitute an unlawful attack. A grand jury failed to return any indictments after hearing the evidence. Later, however, a grand juror came forward and accused the state attorney's office of leading the jurors to not indict. Tom Flynn, a retired U.S. public defender in St. Louis, Missouri, says the whole Mathew Walker story pisses him off. Flynn lives in Punta Gorda now, and he wonders how the 10 guards in Walker's case got away with his beating death. I have a good knowledge of the system and have seen similar cases in my 35 years in criminal and civil law, Flynn told me. But, he said, I have never had a client get beaten like Walker and I. Flynn is surprised no one was charged in Walker's death. That would not have been a tough case to bring charges, it seems to me, he said. There are ways to bring pressure on the guards to talk. Flynn said the New York case boiled down to making a deal with a guard to testify against the other officers who attacked Moore. I just do not understand how these guys, Walker's attackers, got out of it by saying there are no witnesses and all claiming they knew nothing. It was a horrible case. A guy gets beaten to death while in state custody and they do not even go to trial? If you go to trial and get beat, so be it. But they didn't even try. Flynn is so inflamed about the Walker case, he said he has been in contact with federal investigators. And he believes the Walker case is not over. There is a possibility, he said, that a civil rights investigation is underway in the death of Mathew Walker. Calls to the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office in Fort Myers failed to confirm anything of the sort. No surprise. Federal cases are not openly discussed until the charges are filed. Could it be Mathew Walker will see justice served after all? John Hackworth is editor of the Sun newspapers. You can contact him at jackworth@sun-herald.com. John Hackworth, editor.